Richard thought his first-class ticket and platinum status gave him the right to treat anyone like a servant. When he sat next to Sam, a quiet man reading a book in a hoodie, he saw an easy target for his stress and prejudice. From trying to buy Sam's seat to treating him like a customized trash can, Richard crossed every line of human decency. But he forgot the golden rule of business. You never know who you're sitting next to. What happens when the invisible man he bullied turns out to be the billionaire chairman holding the keys to his future? The boardroom reveal will leave you speechless. The air in Terminal 1 at O'Hare International Airport was thick with the specific kind of humidity that comes from thousands of damp winter coats, and the smell of reheating pretzel dough. It was a friction point, a place where the carefully calibrated timelines of business travelers collided with the chaotic entropy of families on vacation. For Richard Sterling it was a battlefield. Richard paced a tight circle near gate C12, the rubber soles of his Italian loafers squeaking faintly against the industrial carpet. He was 45 years old, wearing a bespoke navy suit that cost more than the Honda Civic parked in the employee lot outside. His hair was gelled into a rigid aerodynamic helmet, and the veins in his neck were currently fighting a losing battle against his shirt collar. He tapped his wireless earbud with a manic intensity. I do not care about the supply chain bottlenecks in Shenzhen, Richard hissed, keeping his voice just low enough to avoid a public disturbance but loud enough to signal his importance to anyone within a 10-foot radius. I care that the Q3 projections are bleeding red ink. If we do not close this merger in New York by tomorrow morning, we are not just missing a bonus, Jerry. We are looking at a restructuring bankruptcy. Do you understand what that does to my stock options? He stopped pacing and glared at the departure screen. Delayed. Again. 15 minutes pushed to 30. Richard exhaled a sharp, angry sound. He looked around for a target, someone to blame for the incompetence of the universe. His eyes landed on the seating area. Sitting in the priority section, directly across from the podium, was a man who looked like he had gotten lost on his way to a library. He was older, perhaps 60, with graying hair cropped close to his scalp. He wore a heather gray hoodie that looked soft but undeniably casual, paired with dark denim jeans and generic sneakers. He was reading a physical book, a thick hardcover with no dust jacket, his eyes moving across the page with a slow, deliberate rhythm. He had wired headphones in his ears, connected to an old smartphone that sat face down on his thigh. Richard sneered internally. The man took up space. He was taking up a seat in the area reserved for Group 1 and 2 passengers, despite looking like he was waiting for a standby ticket on a budget carrier. Richard hated the democratization of air travel. He hated that credit card points allowed people who didn't understand the unwritten rules of business class to invade his sanctuary. Richard checked his watch. He needed to be the first one on that plane. He needed overhead bin space for his Tumi carry-on because checking a bag was for amateurs and tourists. He walked up to the gate agent, a harried woman named Sarah who was typing furiously on her terminal. "Excuse me," Richard said, leaning over the counter. His tone was smooth, coated in a veneer of professional politeness that didn't reach his eyes. "I see the delay. I'm Richard Sterling. Global Services status. I have a critical meeting in Manhattan. Is there any way we can expedite the boarding process? I need to get settled to make some calls before we push back." Sarah didn't look up immediately. "Sir, we are waiting for the cleaning crew to finish. Everyone wants to get on board. Please wait for your group number to be called." Richard stiffened. "I don't think you heard me. I'm Sterling. Check the manifest. I'm in 1A. I fly this route weekly." Sarah finally looked up, her expression tired. "I know who you are, Mr. Sterling. And the answer is still the same. Please step back from the podium." Richard opened his mouth to argue, to deploy one of the phrases he used in boardrooms like "let's circle back to the value proposition," but a movement caught his eye. The man in the gray hoodie had stood up. He closed his book, Something by a Philosopher, Richard noted with a scoff, and walked calmly toward the podium. Richard stepped in front of him, instinctively blocking the path. "The gate lice are gathering early," Richard muttered, loud enough for the man to hear. "Group 5 is going to be a while, pal. Sit down." The man stopped. He didn't flinch. He didn't look at his phone. He looked directly at Richard. His eyes were dark, deep-set, and held a terrifyingly neutral expression. There was no anger, no intimidation, just a calm assessment, as if he were looking at a spreadsheet with an error in column D. "Excuse me," the man said. His voice was a deep baritone, quiet but resonant. Richard pointed at the carpet. "Priority boarding. You need to wait your turn." The man didn't argue. He didn't pull the "do you know who I am" card. He simply stepped sideways, moving around Richard with the fluidity of water flowing around a rock. He approached the scanner. Sarah, the gate agent, looked up. Her face transformed. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a genuine warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Vance. It's been a while." "Has Sarah," the man said. "How is your daughter? Did she get into that art program in Wisconsin?" "She did. She starts in the fall." "Thank you for asking." Sarah beamed. She tapped a few keys. "I have you in 1B today. The cabin is ready for you." She didn't ask for his ID. She didn't ask for his boarding pass. She just waved him through. Richard stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar. He watched the man in the hoodie walk down the jet bridge alone. He turned back to Sarah, his face flushing a mottled red. "What was that? You just told me the cabin wasn't ready. Who is that? An air marshal? Deadheading crew?" Sarah looked back at Richard, her smile vanishing instantly. "Mr. Vance is a priority passenger, Mr. Sterling. We are now ready for Group 1. Richard fumbled for his phone, scanning his boarding pass with a violent motion. "Unbelievable," he muttered as he stormed past her. "Unions protecting their own. Probably a mechanic getting a free ride while I pay $6,000 for a seat." He marched down the jet bridge, the injustice of it fueling his adrenaline. He needed that adrenaline. He was terrified. The merger was falling apart. The due diligence team had found holes in the logistics data. And if he didn't charm the board of Vance Logistics tomorrow, his firm, Sterling Capital, would implode. He was a man on the edge, and he had no patience for people who didn't know their place. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 777 was a haven of beige leather and cool, recycled air. It was a space designed to make wealthy people forget they were in a metal tube hurtling through the stratosphere. Richard entered and immediately spotted the man in the hoodie. He was settled in seat 1B, the window seat on the right side. He had already placed his small, battered leather satchel under the seat in front of him, not in the overhead bin, and was wiping down his tray table with a sanitizing wipe. Richard stopped at row 1. His seat was 1A, the aisle. "Excuse me," Richard said, hoisting his heavy rolling bag. The man, Mr. Vance, looked up. He nodded politely and pulled his legs in slightly to allow Richard access to the overhead bin. Richard slammed his bag into the compartment, taking up the entirety of the space for both seats. He sat down, exhaling loudly, expanding his elbows to claim the armrest dominance immediately. He pulled out his laptop, a tablet, and 2 phones, creating a fortress of technology on his tray table. The man in 1B was quiet. He put his headphones back in. Richard looked at him. The proximity was irritating. He wanted to work. He wanted privacy. He didn't want to sit next to someone who looked like he was going to a community college lecture. "Hey," Richard said, tapping the partition between them. The man removed one earbud. "Yes." Richard put on his best sales smile. It was a smile that showed teeth but no warmth. "Look, nothing personal. I have a lot of sensitive documents to review. Mergers and acquisitions stuff. Heavy hitting. I need space." The man blinked. "I understand. I notice seat 4D is open. It's economy plus bulkhead. Lots of legroom." Richard pulled a money clip from his pocket. "I'm willing to pay for your upgrade fee, obviously. And here is $200 cash for your dinner tonight. Treat yourself." Richard held out 2 crisp $100 bills. It was a gesture he had used a dozen times. Money solved friction. Money greased wheels. The man looked at the money. Then he looked at Richard's face. He didn't look offended. He looked amused in a very distant way. "No, thank you," the man said softly. Richard blinked. "Excuse me? I prefer the window," the man said. "And I have work to do as well." "Work?" Richard scoffed. He looked at the man's empty tray table, save for the book. "What work? You're reading Marcus Aurelius. What are you, a retired history teacher? Look, take the $300. That's a week of groceries, pal." The man turned his body fully toward Richard. His movements were slow, deliberate. "My name is Sam," he said, "and I am comfortable here. Please keep your money, Mr. Sterling. You might need it in New York. New York is expensive. Sam put his earbud back in and turned to the window. Richard sat there, the rejected bills burning a hole in his hand. He shoved them back into his pocket, furious. The audacity. The sheer lack of situational awareness. It wasn't just that the man refused. It was that he refused without deferring to Richard's obvious superiority. Richard opened his laptop and began aggressively typing an email to his assistant. Seatmate is a nightmare. Stubborn geriatric in a hoodie. Can you believe the airline lets these upgrades through? The brand dilution is real. The flight attendants began their service. The lead purser was a man named Marcus, a tall, black man in his 30s with the posture of a former Marine and the tired eyes of someone who had dealt with too many entitled passengers. Mr. Sterling, Marcus said, placing a warm towel on Richard's tray. Welcome back. Yeah, thanks, Richard grunted, not looking up from his screen. Double espresso. And keep them coming. I have a long flight. Certainly. And for you, sir? Marcus turned to Sam. Sam smiled. Just sparkling water with a lime, please. Thank you, Marcus. You're welcome, sir. Richard paused his typing. He noticed the tone. Marcus had been professional with him, but he was warm with Sam. Grated on him. It felt like a conspiracy of the lower class. As the plane taxied and took off, the cabin settled into a hum. Richard worked furiously. He spread his papers out. He allowed his spreadsheets to bleed over the invisible line of the center console. He needed room. His work was important. Sam was just reading. Surely Sam wouldn't mind if Richard's elbow invaded his space. Sam didn't say anything. He just shifted slightly, leaning against the fuselage, making himself smaller. To Richard, this was a victory. It confirmed his worldview. Alpha males took space and betas ceded it. He felt a surge of confidence. He was going to crush this meeting. 2 hours into the flight, the atmosphere shifted. Richard had consumed 3 double espressos. He was wired, jittery, and the numbers on his spreadsheet weren't adding up. The logistics costs for Vance's trucking fleet were higher than he anticipated. If he couldn't justify the synergies, the board would laugh him out of the room. He needed to think. He rubbed his temples. He finished the last dregs of his coffee. The porcelain cup sat on his laptop deck, cluttering his workspace. He needed to get rid of it. Without looking up, purely on muscle memory from years of dining in high-end restaurants where waiters hovered invisibly, Richard extended his right arm. He held the cup out into the space between the seats, dangling it slightly. He didn't check if a flight attendant was there. He didn't turn his head. He just held it out, snapping his wrist a little, a nonverbal command. Take this. The cup hovered inches from Sam's face. Sam froze. He lowered his book. He looked at the dirty cup, stained with brown foam, invading his personal sphere. He looked at Richard's face, which was illuminated by the blue light of the spreadsheet, completely oblivious to the human being he was insulting. Across the aisle in seat 1D, an older woman named Betty was watching. She was 70, wearing a Chanel suit, her white hair coiffed into a perfect bob. She was a retired federal judge, though Richard would have dismissed her as just another grandmother. She gasped audibly. Marcus, the flight attendant, was in the galley, too far away to reach them instantly. The silence in row 1 was deafening. Sam did not take the cup. Richard, feeling the weight of the cup still in his hand, shook it impatiently. Trash, he muttered, still not looking up. Sam closed his book. He placed it gently on his lap. He reached out, not to take the cup, but to push Richard's arm back. He did it with one finger, pressing firmly against Richard's wrist. Richard recoiled as if he had been burned. He dropped the cup. It tumbled onto the center console, splashing a few drops of cold coffee onto his own expensive tailored trousers. Hey! Richard yelled, jumping up. What is wrong with you? He grabbed a napkin, frantically dabbing at his pants. You ruined my suit. Are you crazy? Sam sat perfectly still. He picked up the empty cup from the console and placed it on Richard's tray table, right on top of the shift key of his laptop. I believe you were confused, Sam said. His voice was no longer soft. It was steel. You mistook me for a waiter. Or perhaps a trash can. I am neither. Richard stared at him, his face turning a violent shade of purple. The embarrassment was hot and prickly. He knew deep down that he had made a mistake. But Richard Sterling did not apologize. Not to men in hoodies. Not when he was stressed. When Richard was cornered, he attacked. "You threw coffee on me," Richard shouted, his voice cracking. He looked around the cabin seeking allies. "Did you see that? He physically assaulted me." Marcus came rushing down the aisle. "Mr. Sterling, please lower your voice. What is the problem?" "He attacked me." Richard pointed a trembling finger at Sam. "He hit my arm. I want him moved. I want the police called. This is assault." Sam looked at Marcus. The flight attendant looked exhausted. He looked at the coffee stain, then at Sam's calm demeanor. "Sir," Marcus said to Sam, "did you hit him?" "I redirected his arm," Sam said clearly. "He was attempting to hand me his garbage. I declined the transaction." "That's a lie," Richard screamed. "He's lying. Look at him. He's aggressive. He's been staring at me the whole flight. He's probably on drugs. I don't feel safe." The phrase "I don't feel safe" was a weapon. Richard knew it. In the corporate world, in the modern world, claiming a lack of safety triggered protocols. To forced action. It was the ultimate trump card of the privileged. Betty, the woman across the aisle, unbuckled her seatbelt. "Young man," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. "I saw the whole thing. You stuck your dirty dishes in his face." "Shut up, lady." Richard snapped at her. "Mind your own business. This is between me and the help." The cabin went silent. The word help hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus stood up straighter. His jaw tightened. "Sir, you will not speak to other passengers that way. I'm a platinum member." Richard yelled, losing control of the narrative. "I spend $50,000 a year with this airline. You work for me. I want the captain. Get the captain out here right now. I want this man removed from first class. He doesn't belong here. Look at him. He's a thug." Sam slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He didn't stand up. He simply rotated his body to face Richard fully. "A thug?" Sam repeated. "Yes." Richard panted. "You don't fit the profile. We all know it. You're probably flying on miles you bought or stole. You think you can touch me? I own this cabin." Richard was spiraling. The pressure of the merger, the fear of bankruptcy, and the cognitive dissonance of being challenged by someone he deemed inferior had broken his filter. He wasn't just a rude passenger anymore. He was a liability. Marcus stepped between them. "Mr. Sterling, sit down. Now." "No." Richard pushed past Marcus, leaning over Sam. "I want your name. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to ruin you. Do you know who I am? I am the vice president of Sterling Capital. I make one phone call and your life is over." Sam looked up at Richard. For the first time, a small, sad smile touched his lips. It wasn't a smile of submission. It was the smile a parent gives a toddler having a tantrum in a supermarket. "Sit down, Richard," Sam said. "Before you say something that costs you more than a dry cleaning bill." "Are you threatening me?" Richard shrieked. He turned to the cabin. "He threatened me. That's a terroristic threat." Marcus pulled a red plastic card from his pocket. It was the Section 40302 notice of violation. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming purely command-driven. "This is a formal warning. You are interfering with the duties of a flight crew and disturbing the peace of the cabin. If you do not sit down and strap in immediately, we will divert this aircraft to Cleveland. You will be met by federal law enforcement. We will not be going to New York." The threat of diverting, of missing the meeting, pierced through Richard's rage fog. Cleveland meant missing the merger. Missing the merger meant bankruptcy. He froze. He looked at the red card. He looked at Marcus's unyielding face. He looked at Betty, who was writing something down in a notebook with a judgmental scowl. And finally he looked at Sam. Sam had opened his book again. He wasn't even looking at Richard. He had already dismissed him. Richard swallowed hard. The humiliation was total. He felt the eyes of every person in the cabin on him. He adjusted his jacket, trying to salvage some scrap of dignity.
Fine, Richard said.
"But I am filing a formal complaint against all of you, especially you." He pointed at Sam. "You don't know who you messed with." Richard sat down in 1A. He buckled his belt with aggressive, jerky movements. He stared straight ahead, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He hated Sam. He hated him with a burning, irrational intensity. He hated him because Sam had won without raising his voice. He hated him because, for a brief second, Richard had felt small. He pulled out his phone and typed a note to his legal team. Need background check on passenger 1B. Flight 492. Harassment suit pending. He glanced sideways. Sam was reading. Just wait, Richard thought. Just wait until we land. The real world is my turf. In the boardroom, money talks. And guys like you carry the bags. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, shaking the frame. Richard gripped the armrest, his knuckles white. Sam didn't even look up from the page. The cabin altitude was set to 6,000 feet, but for Richard Sterling, the pressure felt like the bottom of the Mariana Trench. The red plastic notice of violation card had disappeared back into Marcus's pocket, but its afterimage burned behind Richard's eyelids. He sat rigidly in seat 1A, his posture a parody of executive composure. He had not been defeated, he told himself. He had been managed, and there was a difference. Richard stared at the seatback screen, watching the flight map inch agonizingly slowly across Pennsylvania. He could feel the eyes of the cabin on him. He didn't need to turn around to know that the grandmother across the aisle, the one who had dressed him down like a schoolboy, was watching him. He could feel her judgment radiating like heat. Beside him, the man in the hoodie, Sam, had returned to his book. The audacity of it made Richard's teeth grind. How could he read? How could he sit there, breathing the same recycled air, acting as if he hadn't just orchestrated the humiliation of a vice president? It was psychological warfare. That was the only explanation. The man was a grifter, a professional agitator looking for a settlement check. Richard pulled his phone out, shielding the screen with his hand. He connected to the onboard Wi-Fi. It was slow, expensive, and currently his only lifeline. He opened his email app, his thumbs flying across the glass with aggressive precision. Subject: urgent/security issues/flight 492. To legal@sterlingcapital.com. j.miller@sterlingcapital.com. Jerry, I have a situation. I am being harassed by a passenger in 1B. Hostile behavior. Physical contact. The flight crew is biased and threatening me with federal citations. I need you to contact Port Authority at JFK immediately. I want police waiting at the gate. I want this man identified and charged. This is a safety issue. He is unstable. Do not let him walk away. Richard hit send. The small whoosh sound gave him a hit of dopamine. He was taking back control. The real world operated on laws and lawyers, not flight attendants with power trips. He glanced sideways. Sam was still reading. Then Richard had a thought. He needed to get ahead of the narrative with the client. If he arrived rattled, Vance Logistics would smell blood. He needed to project strength. He opened a new draft, addressed to the general executive inbox of Vance Logistics, the only direct contact method they had been given for the elusive chairman. Subject: merger meeting/arrival update. To executive office at vancelogistics.com. To Mr. Vance and the board. I am currently en route. Despite some unfortunate service disruptions and security concerns on the flight caused by unruly passengers, I am focused and ready to close this deal. My team has prepared a restructuring plan that will maximize efficiency for your fleet. I look forward to bringing professional standards to your operation. Best, Richard Sterling. VP Sterling Capital. He read it over. Professional. Stoic. A subtle dig at the unruly passenger to explain any potential moodiness upon arrival. He hit send. 2 seconds later, a soft chime sounded from the seat next to him. Richard froze. Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't unlock it immediately. He finished the paragraph he was reading, marked the page with a thin ribbon, and then tapped the screen. Richard watched from the corner of his eye. He saw the notification banner. He couldn't read the text, but he saw the Gmail icon. Sam read the message. He adjusted his glasses. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped his lips. It wasn't a sigh of anger. It was the sound a structural engineer makes when he finds a crack in the foundation. Sam typed a reply. It was short. He hit send. Richard's phone buzzed. He looked down. A new email from Executive office at VanceLogistics.com. Richard's heart hammered. A response from the chairman? In flight? The man must be a machine. Richard opened it with trembling fingers. Mr. Sterling, focus on your presentation. Character is revealed in transit, not just at the destination. We will see you soon.
Sva.
Richard stared at the screen. Character is revealed in transit. It was a strange thing for a logistics chairman to say. Usually they asked about ETAs or delays. It felt philosophical, oddly personal. He looked at Sam. Sam had put his phone away and was staring out the window at the sea of clouds. Richard felt a sudden paranoid chill. Could Sam have seen his screen? No. The privacy filter was on. Could Sam be a corporate spy? Maybe he worked for a competitor. Maybe he was tracking Richard's communications. Excuse me, Richard said. The silence was suffocating him. He needed to poke the bear. He needed to prove he wasn't afraid. Sam turned. His movement was slow, deliberate. Yes, Richard? You got service up here? Richard asked, feigning casualness. My Wi-Fi is spotting in and out. It is adequate, Sam said. Who are you texting? Richard pressed. You smiled. Girlfriend? Sam looked at Richard for a long moment. The silence stretched until the ambient roar of the engine seemed to fade away. I am communicating with my team, Sam said. We are preparing for a difficult meeting. We are concerned about a potential liability. Richard let out a short, bark-like laugh. Liability? That's rich coming from you. You realize when we land there are going to be people waiting for you? Real police. Not flight attendants with plastic cards. Sam's expression didn't change. He didn't look frightened. He looked disappointed. I expect there will be people waiting for both of us, Richard, Sam said softly. He turned back to the window, effectively ending the conversation. Richard sat back unsettled. The man's confidence was unnatural. It didn't fit the profile. A man in a hoodie flying alone harassed by a VP should be nervous. He should be defensive. Sam was acting like he held a royal flush, and Richard couldn't figure out where the cards were hidden. The descent into Kennedy International was rough. The plane cut through layers of slate-gray storm clouds, buffeted by crosswinds that made the overhead bins rattle. Richard hated turbulence. It was the one thing he couldn't negotiate with. He gripped the armrests, his knuckles turning the color of old parchment. He squeezed his eyes shut as the plane dropped suddenly, a stomach-churning lurch that elicited gasps from the economy cabin behind them. In seat 1B, Sam was perfectly still. He wasn't gripping the armrests. His hands were folded loosely in his lap. He was watching the wing flex through the window, observing the physics of the aircraft with a detached curiosity. It's just air, Sam said, his voice cutting through Richard's panic. What? Richard snapped, his eyes flying open. Displaced air, Sam said. The wing is designed to bend. If it were rigid, it would snap. Flexibility is strength. I don't need a physics lesson, Richard spat, wiping sweat from his upper lip. I need to get on the ground. The plane slammed onto the tarmac with a violent thud, bouncing once before settling. The reverse thrusters roared, a deafening mechanical scream that signaled the end of the ordeal. As the plane taxied toward the gate, the sound of seatbelt buckles clicking open filled the cabin before the light even turned off. Richard was up instantly. He grabbed his bag from the overhead bin, swinging it dangerously close to Sam's head. Sam leaned away, saying nothing. Get out of my way, Richard muttered to no one in particular, crowding the aisle. Marcus, the flight attendant, stood at the front of the cabin, blocking the exit door. Please remain seated until the captain turns off the fasten seatbelt sign, Marcus announced, staring directly at Richard. Richard ignored him, standing in the aisle tapping his foot. He checked his phone. No reply from Jerry about the police. Useless. He would have to handle it himself. He would flag down the first officer he saw in the terminal. The bell chimed. The door opened. Richard pushed forward, using his shoulder to leverage past Betty, the older woman. Excuse me, young man, Betty said, stumbling slightly. Move, Richard said. I have a meeting. He stormed onto the jet bridge, the humid New York air hitting him like a wet towel. He walked fast, his rolling bag clattering behind him. He scanned the gate area for police. He saw 2 officers standing near the counter, talking to the gate agent. There. Richard pointed back toward the jet bridge. Officers. That man. The one in the gray hoodie coming off now. I want to file a report. The officers looked up. They looked at Richard, red-faced and sweating. Then they looked behind him. Sam walked off the jet bridge. He had his satchel over his shoulder. He walked with an easy long-legged stride. The officers straightened up. They didn't reach for handcuffs. They nodded respectfully. Good afternoon, sir, one officer said to Sam. Sam nodded back. Officers. Stay safe out there. He kept walking. Richard stood frozen. Aren't you going to stop him? Richard sputtered. He assaulted me. He was threatening the crew. The officer looked at Richard with tired eyes. Sir, unless the pilot files a report, we suggest you keep moving. Don't block the flow of traffic. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. He watched Sam's gray hoodie disappear into the crowd. Unbelievable, Richard whispered. He grabbed his bag. Fine. I'll deal with him later. I have a company to buy. He rushed through the terminal, fueled by a mixture of rage and adrenaline. He needed to get to the pickup area. He had a car reserved, a black Suburban. He would sit in the back, air conditioning blasting, and forget this nightmare. He exited the terminal into the chaotic symphony of JFK traffic. Horns blared. Whistles blew. He scanned the line of black cars. He saw a man holding a sign, Sterling. Finally. But just as he started toward it, a sleek black Maybach pulled up to the curb right in front of him. It was a Phantom, a car that cost more than Richard's house. The rear tinted window rolled down an inch. Richard paused. Was this for him? Had Vance Logistics sent an upgrade? It would make sense. They wanted to impress him. They knew he was the only one who could save their bottom line. A uniformed driver stepped out. He was immense, a former linebacker in a suit that struggled to contain his shoulders. He walked around the car. Richard stepped forward, adjusting his tie. He put on his executive face. Good afternoon. I assume this is for... The driver walked right past him. Richard turned. Sam was standing there. He had emerged from the crowd, calm as the eye of a storm. The driver opened the rear door of the Maybach. Mr. Vance, the driver said. His voice was deep and deferential. The board is assembled. Traffic is heavy on the Van Wyck, but we have a route. Thank you, Arthur, Sam said. Richard's brain misfired. He heard the name Vance, but his confirmation bias was a fortress. Mr. Vance? No. That's the chairman's name. This guy is Sam. The driver must be calling him by the boss's name because he works for him. Or maybe Vance is code. Hey! Richard shouted, stepping toward the car. Sam paused, 1 foot inside the vehicle. He looked back. Richard pointed at the car. You work for them? You're a driver? Sam looked at Richard. The tinted glass reflected Richard's disheveled suit, his sweaty forehead, his desperation. Something like that, Sam said. Richard let out a breathy laugh. I knew it. I knew you were staff. Look, tell your boss I'm coming. Tell him Richard Sterling is 5 minutes behind. And tell him to have the coffee ready. And not the cheap stuff. Sam stared at him. For a second, Richard thought he saw a flicker of pity in the man's eyes. I will deliver the message, Sam said. He got in. The heavy door thudded shut with the sound of a bank vault closing. The Maybach glided away, parting the sea of yellow taxis like a shark moving through minnows. Richard stood there, feeling a strange sense of victory. I was right, he thought. He was just a driver. A glorified chauffeur flying on a deadhead ticket. That explains the attitude. He was jealous. Richard turned to his own driver, the one holding the cardboard sign. Let's go, Richard barked. And step on it. I'm not losing a commission because of traffic. The ride to Manhattan was a blur of emails and phone calls. Richard was in his element now. He was barking orders at his assistant, demanding updated spreadsheets. He forgot about Sam. Sam was a gnat he had swatted away. Now he was hunting big game. The headquarters of Vance Logistics was a monolith of glass and steel in Midtown. It wasn't flashy like a tech startup. It was heavy, permanent, a building that said we own the trucks that move the world. Richard walked into the lobby. The air conditioning was crisp. The marble floors clicked under his heels. He felt his power returning. He was Richard Sterling. He was the fix. He approached the reception desk. A young woman was on the phone. Richard tapped his watch on the marble counter. Click, click, click. The receptionist looked up. Can I help you? Richard Sterling. Sterling Capital. I'm here for the merger meeting. Boardroom A. I'm running 2 minutes late, so if you could just buzz me through, that would be great. ID please, she said. Richard sighed, rolling his eyes. He slapped his driver's license on the counter. Is this really necessary? They are waiting for me. Standard protocol, sir. She scanned it. She handed him a visitor badge. It was a clip-on. Flimsy plastic. Wear this at all times. Take elevator bank B to the 40th floor. Richard clipped the badge to his lapel, grimacing at how it ruined the line of his suit. He marched to the elevators. He checked his reflection in the polished brass doors. He fixed his hair. He wiped the last sheen of travel sweat from his brow. He looked like a shark. Game time, he whispered. The elevator shot up 40 floors in seconds. The doors opened to a lobby that smelled of expensive leather and old money. A woman in a sharp gray suit was waiting for him. Mr. Sterling? Yes. I'm Elena, Mr. Vance's executive assistant. They are ready for you. She led him down a long corridor lined with models of ships, trains, and planes. The history of American commerce. Richard barely looked at them. He was mentally rehearsing his opening line. Gentlemen, let's talk about efficiency. Elena stopped at a set of double mahogany doors. She placed her hand on the handle. A heads up, Mr. Sterling, she said softly. The chairman is very particular about punctuality. I'm here, aren't I? Richard said, checking his Rolex. And I'm worth the wait. Elena looked at him. Her expression was unreadable. She pushed the doors open. The boardroom was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the skyline, but the blinds were partially drawn to reduce the glare. A long table, carved from a single slab of black walnut, dominated the room. 12 people sat around it. Men and women in dark suits looking grave. There were tablets, pitchers of water, and stacks of thick binders. At the head of the table, the chairman's chair was turned away, facing the window. A high-backed leather chair that looked like a throne. Richard strode in. The energy in the room shifted. Everyone looked at him. They didn't smile. Good afternoon, everyone, Richard projected his voice, placing his leather bag on the table with a heavy thud. Apologies for the delay. The airlines are not what they used to be. I had the misfortune of sitting next to a particularly difficult individual who seemed to think first class was a debating society. He chuckled. No one else laughed. Richard faltered slightly but recovered. He unlatched his bag. But that's irrelevant. I'm here to save you money. I've reviewed your fleet metrics and frankly, your driver retention program is a financial black hole. We need to cut the fat. He pulled out his presentation packets. Is Mr. Vance joining us? Richard asked, looking at the empty chair at the head of the table. Or should I start? One of the board members, a woman with steel gray hair, spoke up. Mr. Vance is present, Mr. Sterling. Richard looked around. Where? The high-backed leather chair slowly swiveled around. Richard's smile froze. It didn't fade. It just petrified, turning into a rictus of confusion. Sitting in the chair was not a man in a suit. It was a man in a heather gray hoodie. He was wearing reading glasses. On the table in front of him sat a dirty, empty espresso cup. The man looked up over the rim of his glasses. He looked at Richard with that same calm, terrifyingly neutral expression he had worn at Gate C12. Hello, Richard, Sam said. Richard's brain stopped. The world tilted on its axis. The hum of the air conditioning sounded like a roar in his ears. He blinked. He looked at the hoodie. He looked at the face. He looked at the espresso cup. No, Richard whispered. His voice was a dry croak. No, you're the driver. Sam folded his hands on the table. I am the driver of this company, yes, Sam said. His voice echoed in the silent room. And you were saying something about cutting the fat? Richard felt his knees turn to water. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. The flashbacks hit him like physical blows. Got the lease. Trash. Do you know who I am? You don't belong here. Every word he had spoken on the flight came back to him, not as memories but as a verdict. I didn't know, Richard stammered. He looked around the room pleading for help. The board members stared back at him with cold, impassive faces. They knew. They had always known. Sam picked up the espresso cup. He turned it slowly in his hands. You didn't know, Sam repeated quietly. That is exactly the problem, Richard. You assumed that because I was quiet I was weak. You assumed that because I was comfortable I was lazy. And you assumed that because I didn't wear a suit I didn't matter. Sam set the cup down. It made a sharp clack against the wood. Please sit down, Sam said. We have a lot to discuss. Starting with your definition of liability. Richard fell into the nearest chair. He wasn't sitting. He was collapsing. The presentation packets in his hand felt heavy, like lead weights dragging him down to the bottom of the ocean. He realized with a sickening clarity that the plane had never landed. He was still in freefall. The silence in the boardroom was not empty. It was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against Richard Sterling's chest, compressing his lungs until each breath became a conscious, desperate effort. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC system and the thudding of his own heart, which seemed to be trying to escape his ribcage. Richard sat, or rather slumped, in the ergonomic leather chair. His eyes were fixed on the dirty porcelain espresso cup sitting on the polished walnut table. It was a grotesque object in this pristine environment, a brown stain on perfection. It was the smoking gun. Sam Vance sat opposite him. He hadn't changed. The heather gray hoodie, which had looked so out of place in the first-class cabin, now seemed to possess a strange, terrifying authority. In the context of the airport, it whispered poverty. In the context of the boardroom at the head of the table, it screamed power. It said, I do not need to impress you. You need to impress me. Sam didn't speak immediately. He picked up a silver pen, a stark contrast to the cheap plastic one Richard had seen him use on the plane, and tapped it rhythmically against a notepad. Top, top, top. The sound was a countdown. Elena, the executive assistant, stepped forward to pour water. She moved toward Sam first. No, Elena, Sam said, his voice soft but filling the room. Mr. Sterling looks dehydrated. Serve him first. Richard flinched as the glass was placed in front of him. His hands were trembling too much to lift it. Richard started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the ghost of his corporate persona. Mr. Vance. I want to apologize. The flight was extenuating circumstances. Sam stopped tapping the pen. He looked over the rim of his reading glasses.
Extenuating. Sam repeated.
That is a legal term, Richard. It implies that the situation forced your behavior, that you were a victim of context. I was under immense pressure, Richard said, gaining a sliver of momentum. The market volatility, the merger timeline. You know how it is. When you're in the trenches fighting for the bottom line, sometimes the niceties slip. The niceties, Sam said. He tasted the word like it was spoiled milk. Sam swiveled his chair slightly to face the board members. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sterling believes that dignity is a nicety, a luxury item, like a hot towel or a pre-departure beverage, something to be discarded when the turbulence hits. A board member to Richard's left, a stern man named Arthur with the build of a former union rep, crossed his arms. The trenches? Arthur grunted. Son, I drove a rig for 20 years before I sat at this table. The trenches are where you look out for your neighbor, not treat him like your valet. Richard felt the walls closing in. He pivoted, trying to appeal to their greed. Look, let's put the personal aside, Richard said, his voice rising in pitch. We are here to talk business. My firm, Sterling Capital, has identified 30% redundancy in your supply chain. We can save you $12 million in Q1 alone. That's the reality. That's the numbers. Does it matter if I was rude to a passenger on a plane if I make you $12 million? He looked around the table, desperate for a nod, a sign that profit still ruled the world. Sam smiled. It was the same sad, disappointed smile he had worn when Richard threatened to call the police. That is the question, isn't it? Sam mused. He opened the leather folder in front of him. It contained a single sheet of paper, the notice of violation card that Marcus had given Richard on the plane. Sam must have retrieved it from the crew after disembarking. You see, Richard, Sam continued, sliding the red card across the table. I didn't build Vance Logistics on numbers. I built it on observation. Sam stood up. He wasn't a tall man, but in that moment he seemed to fill the room. He walked slowly toward the window, looking out at the sprawling city. Logistics is not about trucks, Sam said, his back to the room. It is about people. It is about the driver who decides to drive through a snowstorm to deliver medicine, because he cares about the destination. It is about the warehouse manager who stays late to fix a packaging error, because he takes pride in his name on the manifest. Sam turned around. You cannot buy that kind of dedication, Richard. You earn it. And you earn it by seeing them. By acknowledging that they exist. Sam pointed a finger at the dirty cup. You handed me your garbage, Sam said. His voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried the force of a gavel strike. You didn't look at me. You didn't ask if I was finished reading. You didn't even check if I was awake. You simply extended your arm, and assumed that the universe would provide a servant to take your waste. It was a mistake. Richard blurted out. I thought you were. You thought I was what? Sam interrupted. I thought you were staff. Richard confessed, and then immediately wished he could bite his tongue off. The boardroom went deadly silent. Staff, Sam repeated. Yes. Richard scrambled. Non-revenue. An employee. I mean, look at the hoodie. You weren't wearing a suit. I assume. You assumed that because I didn't look like you, I served you, Sam finished. And that is why you are a liability, Richard. Not because you are mean, but because you are blind. Sam walked back to the head of the table and leaned on it, his eyes locking onto Richard's. If you cannot distinguish between a billionaire chairman and a staff member, just because of a hoodie, how can I trust you to evaluate my companies? How can I trust you to see the value in a struggling subsidiary? You judge books by their covers, Richard. And in my business, the most valuable assets often look the roughest on the outside. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His entire worldview, the hierarchy of suits, watches, and status was dissolving. Sam sat down. He picked up the red card. You threatened my crew, Sam said matter-of-factly. You told the lead flight attendant, Marcus, that you would have his job. You told him he worked for you because you bought a ticket. I was angry, Richard whispered. Marcus has been with this airline for 15 years, Sam said. He is a father of 2. He is a volunteer firefighter. He handled your tantrum with a restraint that I frankly would not have possessed at his age. And you wanted to destroy his livelihood because he told you to sit down for your own safety. Sam dropped the card. A leader protects his people, Richard. A tyrant threatens them. Vance Logistics has no room for tyrants. Richard felt the tears stinging his eyes. Not tears of remorse, but tears of frustration. The deal was dead. He could see it in their eyes. The bonus. The promotion. The house in the Hamptons. It was all evaporating. So that's it? Richard asked, his voice hollow. You're killing the deal? Because of a cup of coffee? Sam looked at the board members. Then he looked back at Richard. No, Sam said. Richard's head snapped up. Hope, cruel and sharp, pierced his chest. The deal makes sense, Sam said, tapping the financial binder. Your math is correct. The acquisition of your firm would be beneficial for our expansion. Richard sat up straighter. He wiped his palms on his knees. Okay, good. We can work with this. I can apologize to the crew. I can write a letter. I'll make a donation. Sam held up a hand. The deal proceeds, Sam said. But the personnel changes. Sam slid a new document across the table. It wasn't the merger contract. It was a single-page employment offer, stamped with the Vance Logistics logo. We are acquiring Sterling Capital, Sam said. But we are restructuring the leadership. The board has agreed that your current title of vice president is premature. You lack the necessary soft skills for executive management. Richard looked at the document. His eyes widened. Position: Junior Coordinator, Driver Relations. Location: Bronx Distribution Center, Warehouse 4. Reporting to Mrs. Tasha Johnson, Shift Supervisor. Salary: $42,000 per year. Richard looked up, his face pale. Is this a joke? It is an education, Sam said. His face was deadly serious. You will spend 6 months in the Bronx. You will answer the phones. You will listen to drivers calling in with breakdowns, with family emergencies, with payroll issues. You will serve them. Sam leaned forward. If after 6 months Mrs. Johnson reports that you have learned to listen, that you have learned to treat a truck driver with the same respect you treat a CEO, then we will discuss reinstating your executive package. Richard stared at the paper. The salary was less than he spent on wine in a year. The humiliation would be total. He would be working for the very people he had spent his career looking down on. And if I refuse? Richard asked. Sam shrugged. Then you can leave. The merger will still happen. But without you. Your partners at Sterling Capital have already agreed to the terms. They understand that liability needs to be managed. Richard looked at the door. He looked at the contract. He thought about the Bronx. He thought about answering phones. He thought about Tasha Johnson, whoever she was, telling him what to do. His ego, a bruised and battering thing, reared up inside him. He was Richard Sterling. He was a winner. He didn't serve. He commanded. He stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He smoothed his tie. I don't need your charity, Richard spat. And I certainly don't need a lecture on morality from a guy who plays dress up to trick people. Sam didn't blink. It wasn't a trick, Richard. It was a test. And you failed. Richard grabbed his bag. He didn't look at the board members. He couldn't bear to see the pity in their eyes. You'll regret this, Richard said, pointing a shaking finger at Sam. You're walking away from the best talent you'll ever find. Sam picked up his book, the Marcus Aurelius volume from the plane, and opened it. Goodbye, Richard, Sam said, not looking up. Richard turned and marched to the door. He expected someone to call him back. He expected Sam to say, wait, let's negotiate. That's how business worked. It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff. He reached the handle. He paused. Silence. The only sound was the turning of a page. Richard pushed the door open and walked out into the corridor. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind him with a final sealing thud. He stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by the models of ships and planes. He was unemployed. He was blacklisted. And he still had the coffee stain on his pants. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The tension broke. Arthur, the board member, let out a low whistle. Junior coordinator? That was cold, Sam. Sam took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked tired. The formidable chairman vanished, replaced by the weary traveler. He won't take it, Sam said quietly. Men like him never do. They would rather starve than serve. Sam looked at the dirty cup on the table. He picked it up. Elena? Yes, Mr. Vance? The assistant stepped forward. Sam held out the cup. But he didn't thrust it at her. He held it carefully, making eye contact. Would you mind? Sam asked. And please call down to the hangar. Have them send a car for Marcus, the lead flight attendant on my flight. And Mrs. Hale, the passenger in 1D. I want to send them a gift basket. Vintage wine for the lady and for Marcus. Sam thought for a moment. Offer him a position in corporate training, Sam said. We need someone to teach conflict resolution. He has a gift for it. Consider it done, sir. Elena took the cup. Sam stood up. He walked to the window, looking down at the ant-like cars crawling through the streets of Manhattan. Somewhere down there, Richard Sterling was hailing a cab, convincing himself that he was the victim, that the world was unfair, that he was still a king in exile. But Sam knew the truth. The world didn't belong to the kings anymore. It belonged to the drivers, the nurses, the teachers, the people who showed up and did the work. Arthur walked over and stood next to Sam. You think he'll learn? Arthur asked. Sam watched a plane streak across the sky, climbing through the clouds. Some people only look up when they're on the ground, Arthur, Sam said. Maybe one day. But until then, we have a company to run. Sam turned back to the table. He zipped up his hoodie. Let's look at those Q3 projections, Sam said. And someone get me a real cup of coffee. The board members chuckled, opening their binders. The meeting began. Epilogue. 3 months later. O'Hare International Airport was, as always, a chaotic symphony of motion. Marcus stood at the gate podium, checking the final manifest for the flight to London. He wore a suit now, not a uniform. He was the regional director of in-flight standards for Vance Logistics Partner Airline. He looked up as a passenger approached. It was a young man, barely 20, rushing and breathless. He was wearing a fast food uniform, clearly coming off a shift. "I'm so sorry," the young man panted. "I'm late. I know boarding is closed. My bus broke down." Marcus looked at the screen. The door was closed. The jet bridge was retracting. Policy was clear. But Marcus looked at the kid. He saw the fatigue in his eyes, the desperation. He saw a human being, not a seat number. He remembered a flight 3 months ago. He remembered a man in a hoodie who had stood up for him when he couldn't stand up for himself. "Give me a second," Marcus said. He picked up the radio. "Captain, this is ground. We have one more. He's priority." Marcus typed a code into the terminal. He printed a boarding pass. "Go," Marcus said, opening the door to the jet bridge. "Run." The kid looked at him, stunned. "Thank you. Thank you so much. Just do me a favor," Marcus called out as the kid ran down the ramp. The kid turned back. "Yeah. Be nice to the person sitting next to you," Marcus said, smiling. "You never know who they might be." The kid gave a thumbs up and disappeared onto the plane. Marcus stood there for a moment, watching the plane push back. He touched the lapel pin on his suit. A small silver V. He picked up his radio. Flight 492 cleared for departure. Outside the window, the massive Boeing lifted off the runway, climbing into the gray sky, carrying hundreds of stories, hundreds of invisible lives, all hurtling toward the same destination. And somewhere in the cargo hold, amidst the luggage and the freight, was the unshakable truth that Sam Vance had left behind. Dignity is the only currency that matters at 30,000 feet.